How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're on Daf Ches, Daf 8 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, a new Mishnah. Okay, new Mishnah. All right. I wonder where we should end today. That's the question. Where should we end? Tomorrow is going to be a doozy. Nothing so crazy, just like weird, strange math. Wonder where we should end today. Maybe we'll not do that much today, actually. Unless maybe alternatively, actually, we can actually get to the end. We could technically do that. We could technically get to the end. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll get to the end of the daf. That makes sense, right? Okay. Maybe I'll get to the end of the daf. Okay, so we're going to start on Daf Ches Amud Aleph at the Mishnah, about I don't know, 10-15 lines from the top, a few lines into the wide lines. Ches Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. Ve'elu edein shel oivdei kochav. Now these are the Yom Tovim of the Oivdei Kochavim, right? That we had talked about, right? We've been talking about for the past week about how the Fnei Edeim shel Oivdei Kochavim Shlosh Yomim, etc. About the 3 days before the Yom Tovim. What are these Yom Tovim? So Zok the Mishnah, these are the Yom Tovim. Calendar, V'satarnura, V'kartisim. Those are examples of Yom Tovim. Yom Ginusio Shel Malcheim. The Gemara is going to kind of talk about what that is. Yom Aleida, the day, right, the birthday of their king. Big Yom Tov. Yom Hamisa, the day that he dies. That's the opinion of Meir Chacham, whereas the Chacham say, Kol Misa Sheish Ba Sreifa Yesh Ba Avodas Kochavim, Shein Ba Sreifa Ein Ba Avodas Kochavim, whereas the Chacham make a distinction. Meaning Reb Meir says that the day that the king dies, so that's a Yom Tov. But according to the Chacham, it depends. If upon his death they then burn all of his stuff, then that means it's like a special day. Because I guess it's like a thing to like burn all the stuff of the king. So then it's a Yom Tov. And then they do Avodah Zarah, right, the whole 9 yards. Right, again, so the Chacham say, if they burn his stuff, well then Yesh B'Avodas Kochavim, then it's like a proper Yom Tov for the Getchkes. But if they don't burn his stuff, meh, small fry. Small fry, is that small fries? Small beans. Small beans. Ein B'Avodas Kochavim is not considered Avodas Kochavim. But Yom Tiglachas Zkonoi, when a person shaves. Right, let's move on. Uvlariso, and his rat tail. The Gemara is going to talk about that. Or if a person comes out of the sea, I guess he's traveling for a bit. Or if he's let out of prison. Or in Ovikchom is making a chasana for his son. In all these scenarios, in that scenario, right, meaning this is not talking about the king anymore. A random Ovid Kochavim shaves, okay, Mazel Tov. It's a big Yom Tov, but only for him. It's only that day. There's no 3 days prior, and it's only doing business with that individual person, but everybody else is fine. Okay. Says the Gemara, Omer V'chon Ba'rove, calendar, Ches Yom Achar Tkufa. That calendar is 8 days after Tkufas Teves. When the Tkufas Teves, which is like a season kind of thing. When Tkufas Teves begins, so 8 days afterwards is what's called the Yom Tiv, the Avodah Zarah Yom Tiv of calendar. Satarnura Ches Yom Lifnei Tkufa, whereas Satarnura is the 8 days prior to Tkufas Teves. V'simonach, and if you want to remember the order of the Mishnayos, I guess back when they memorized Mishnayos, I guess different tricks would be helpful. So Ocher v'kedem tzatani v'gomer. So Pasuk says Ocher v'kedem tzatani. So the Ocher, i.e. calendar, comes first, which is the Yom Tiv that's after Tkufas Teves, and then v'kedem, and then comes Satarnura, which is the Yom Tiv that's before Tkufas Teves. Okay, fine. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught Lefi Shero. I remember. So Taka, how old am I? 37. It must have been about a long time ago. At least 20 years ago. I came to Eretz Yisrael at least 20 years ago, and I went to this yeshiva. I was in 12th grade, and I went to check out different yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. I came for a few days by myself. I started off, I think the first place I went to was a yeshiva called Ein Surim. And there in the Beis HaMedrash, I remember, I don't know what, we were learning this Gemara. We were learning Mamish this Gemara. And I always remembered it, but I never remembered where it was from. So when I saw this Gemara, I was very happy. I was like, this is the Gemara from the Beis HaMedrash in Ein Surim 20 years ago. That when Adam Arishan noticed, so Adam Arishan was Taka the Gemara is going to mention the machlokes between B'Tishrei Nivra Olam, B'Nisan Nivra Olam. So let's just say for a second he was born in Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah time. And imagine in the northern hemisphere, so not in places like South Africa or I think Australia too, but in the northern places like New York, Eretz Yisrael. So Europe, I imagine. So although Europe's funny when it comes to daylight. But anyways, let's talk about America and Eretz Yisrael. I think it would make things easier to relate to. So, although maybe Europe could be a good example here. Anyways, let's talk about America and Eretz Yisrael because that's what I'm more familiar with. So, immediately after Rosh Hashanah, the days start getting shorter. So Adam Arishan, of course, he was aware that he messed up by eating from the Eitz Hadas. And then all of a sudden he notices that the days are getting shorter and shorter and shorter until they're already much shorter than, until they're already super duper short. And so Tanarabban Lefishara Adam Arishan Yom Shemismaid V'Holech, Adam Arishan noticed that the days were getting shorter and shorter. Omar, he said, Oy li, oy vavoy, he says, Shem b'shvil shesarachti, maybe because of my aveira that I did by eating from the tree of knowledge, maybe the world is now becoming dark and returning to tohu and vohu. This is the death that was decreed upon, that was forced upon, niknisa, find upon me from the heavens. And he got very nervous. So he went and he fasted for 8 days, and he was praying to the Rabbanu Shalom. However, came Tkufas Tevis, right? So meaning Tkufas Tevis is already Chanukah time. And he noticed that the days were now starting to get long again. And he says, the days were getting shorter for a while, but now they are getting longer again. Who, he says, this must simply be how the world works. So he made 8 days of Yomim Tovim. And then the following year, both the 8 days that he was fasting and davening for, as well as the subsequent 8 days that he celebrated post Tkufas Tevis, he made both the 8 days prior to Tkufas Tevis and the 8 days post Tkufas Tevis into Yom Tovim. Okay, so he made them Yom Tovim. And who kvam l'shem shemaim? So when, of course, Adam Arishan made these 2 8-day periods into Yom Tovim, he did it with holy intentions for the Rabbanu Shalom. However, v'hem kvam l'shem avodas kochavim. But of course, the avodas kochavim chaver, they hijacked it for avodas kochavim. Okay. Bishlam l'madam b'tishin v'olam yoy mezuta chaza yom arichei. So I understand, right? It says, I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a machlokes that we've seen before, Masechta Rosh Hashanah, was the world created in Tishrei or was the world created in Nisan? So if the world's created in Tishrei, I totally get this anecdote, right? Adam Rishon was created in Tishrei, and immediately, right, Rosh Hashanah time, the days are already starting to get shorter and shorter and shorter. So immediately he sinned on the first day that he was alive, and all of a sudden he notices that the days are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So I get it. All he knew was days that were getting shorter and shorter. Where am I? But he had never actually seen the longer days yet. So I get what he was getting nervous about. If he said the world was born in Nisan, well then, well then he saw shorter days and also the long days of right. He saw shorter days and he also saw longer days, and you saw them getting longer and longer. So you already saw the days getting longer, and then only later on did he see the days getting shorter. So he must have, should have already realized, that things go up and down, they wax and they wane. Right? So the have zute kulehai lochaza enochinami, but he never noticed, he never saw it, right? But he never experienced the days yet of mamish, the winter, where they get real short. And when that was happening, he was getting real nervous. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught Yom Sheni v'boy Adam Arishin, on the day that Adam, the primordial being, was created, came Shashaka Olav Chama, when the sun set on that day, Omar Oy Li, he said Oy Va'avoy, because of course that was also the day that he ate from the tree of knowledge. Oy Lisha b'shvil shesarachti, because I sinned, Oylem choshuch baidi, all of a sudden, the world is getting dark. The sun is setting, the world is getting dark. V'yachzor oylem l'soyu v'avoyu. V'zoi misa shnikneso oylem min hashamayim. And the world is returning to tohu and vohu. And this is the death that was niknesad upon me from the heavens. Hayoshi betunis uvayche. He was fasting, he was crying, Nebuch. Kol halayla, all night. V'chava boiche kenegdoi. And Eve was also crying right next to him. Came to Omer HaShachar. But then, when dawn came, Omar min hagoi shel oilam hu, and he says, okay, this just must be the way that these days work. The sun rises and the sun sets. Got that. Understood. Omar v'ikriv shor shekarnav kodem farsosav. So he went and he offered an ox whose horns were born before its hooves. Shenema vatitav l'Hashem mishor por makrin mafris. That'll be good for God, better than a ox or a cow. Makrin mafris, whose horns, right? It's the first makri, right? Okay, so first, is there a hagos abach? Right. Bereisha makrin v'ader mafris. First the horns come out, and then the hooves. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Shoshukav Adam Harishin, the ox that primordial Adam offered. Karen Achas Oislo b'mitzcho. It had only one horn on its forehead. The Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Vatitav la'Hashem mishar par makrin mafris," because it says "Vatitav la'Hashem mishar par makrin mafris." Effect the Gemara. Excuse me. Sorry about the effect the Gemara. Makrin tate mashma. But the thing is, I don't understand. How does that pasuk teach that there was only one horn? Makrin, we want to say, implies two. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Makrein Ksiv. It says, or Macron Ksiv. It's written singular, as they say in French, Macron Ksiv. But it's, I guess, it just means one horn. But Rav Master Asakasha. Rome also saw calendar. So Rome has this holiday of calendar. Now, so now here's the thing. Rome is the big city, but then there's all these like towns on the outskirts of Rome, but those towns, are what supply Rome with supplies, right? Animals and things like that. Maybe dairy products, whatever. So they come to Rome and sell their wares. So what is kind of their status? Can you do business with them prior to the Yom Tov? Meaning the Yom Tov are dafka in Rome. They're not necessarily in the outskirts. However, the outskirts the people from the outskirts come to do business in Rome. So the shaila is, if let's say sell a sheep to somebody in the outskirts, do I have to be concerned that even though he's not celebrating the Yom Tov, but he's going to go to Rome to do business, and it could be that the sheep is going to end up in the hands of some Roman idolater? Right, so Oisan Ayoris, Asurus or Mutaris, what's the dealio with those cities on the outskirts? Can you do business with them or not? Do you have to be concerned that maybe your wares are going to end up in the service of Avodah Zarah on the Yom Tov? Rabbi Shimon Levi Omar, Kalando Asur Lakoli. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, Osur. It's Osur to everybody, even the cities on the outskirts. Rabbi Yechanan Omar says Rabbi Yechanan ein asur elo loivdei belvad. Whereas Rabbi Yechanan says that it's only asur to those who worship, i.e., in this case, the Romans. Tana Kavasa Rabbi Yechanan, we have a brayso supporting Rabbi Yechanan that it's only asur to the Romans, not to the cities on the outskirts. Even though they say that in Rome they have the calendar festival, and even though all of the cities around it are Mishubad to Rome. Where's Rome? That's in Italy, right? Mishtabdusla. He atzma ena asur ela lovdea bil vad. However, still the limitations, the business restrictions are limited only to Rome and not to the outskirts. So I think this might be a reference now, maybe to the next section of the Gemara of the Mishnah. Stranalia. Was that in the Mishnah? Stranalia? What do we have? Satarnura. Here we have Stranalia. I don't know. Kartosim. Nice. Kartosim. Was that? Yeah, that was in the Mishnah was Kartisim. Like a Kartis, like a ticket. But this is Kartosim. V'em ginusya shemalchem. V'em shehumlach boy melech. And the day that the king was humlucht, was kinged, was crowned. The fun of Asr, Achar of Mutter is also before these days, but afterwards it is permitted. Also, Mishta Livno, and an idolater who makes a chasana for his son in Asr Ella, Oisei Ayoim, Oisei Ish, only that day and that person, but everybody else is mutter to do business with them. Rav Ashi Afan Nami Tanina says Rav Ashi also learned in the Mishnah the Katani Yom Tiglachas Zkano, that we said in our Mishnah, the day that a person shaves uvloriso and his rat tail. V'yom is, I think that's what it's called, right? A rat tail. That's like when you leave a rat tail at the end of your head. Is that what it's called? V'yom she'olal bo min hayam, and the day that he comes unscathed from the sea. V'yom she'otzeh bo bis asurin, the day that he's let out of jail. Alright, exciting times. What's this gimel? V'ovik kachavim she'osu mishta levno. Alright, Ovik kachavim makes a chasana for his son. Ein osur ela osa yom bilvad v'osa ish. Okay, only that day and that person. Bishlama osa yom afugid lefanov. So I understand if we're saying that day, meaning it's limited to that day, but not the days beforehand. V'lachorov lafuke lefanav v'lachorov, as well as afterwards. It's limited to that day alone. And also ish lafuke mai. When we say only that person, what's the point of that? Lav lafuke mishabdov v'shmamina. So is it not to exclude also, meaning it's only that person and not anybody else who might supply him with goods or anything like that? They would be excluded. Okay? Fine. You can do business with them. Tanya, Rabbi Shmuel, says Rabbi Shmuel, Yisrael shebechutz la'aretz oivdei avodas kechavim b'tayra hein. Says Rabbi Shmuel that Yidden who live outside of Eretz Yisrael, they're like, how do I say this? Oivdei avodas b'tayra. They're like, I don't know, like inevitable Ovdei Kochavim, sort of, like, meaning, they're right, the Yori Shemayim, right, they live life, but Memela, just from the fact that you live in Chutz La'aretz, Memela, what ends up happening is you can't avoid it, you end up being in Ovid Kochavim, B'Tayra. I don't know how to explain that. What does Rashi say? B'Tayra, Klomer, below Kavana, without intention to be Ovid Kochavim, they are. In some Malev, they don't realize that they're Ovdei Kochavim, but they are. Ketzad, how so? Tell me more. For example, you live in Chutz La'aretz, so there's lots of Ovdei Kochavim around. An Ovdei Kochavim makes a chasana for his son. And he invites all the Yidden from the town. So now what happens? Even though they're eating their own food, and then drinking their own drinks, they have their own waiter. But still, the pasuk treats it as though they eat from the offerings of the dead, like Avodah Zarah stuff. Shenemar v'kar lecha, that he, the Oved Kochavim, will call out to you, v'achalta mizivcho, and you will eat from his offering. Ve'ema ad ha'ochil, maybe it's only also if you actually eat from his offering, not just showing up at the chasana. Amarava im kein nema kra v'achalta mizivcho mai v'kar lecha mishas kriya. So when it says v'kar lecha, right, it says he'll call out to you and you'll come. So already from the time that he calls out to you, it's already kilu a problem. Okay. Hilkoch, therefore, Koltas and Yomin, so all 30 days following the chasana of the child of an Oved Kochavim, okay, so an Oved Kochavim, his son gets married, the 30 days following, Ben Omale Machma Silula, Ben Loy Omale Machma Silula, Osir. If the Oved Kochavim says, hey, why don't you come to my house for a Suda? For the full 30 days following, he says, why don't you come over to my house for a Suda? You can't go. Because whether he says, he could explicitly that he wants to give Shevach Vayodaya to his Getchke, or whether he doesn't say it, if it's within 30 days of the Chasana, after the Chasana, so then you have to assume that he's that there's some kind of Avodah Zarah lens. After 30 days, if he says, look, come to my house, my son just got married, come have a Suda by my house, after 30 days, so if he says explicitly that, so he can give a Shevach Vayodaya to his Getchke, Osir. But if he doesn't specifically mention the Getchke, so then it's permitted. And even when he says, come over because of the Hilula, because of my son's Chasana, at a certain point, does that kind of end? So there's a different girsas. I'm going to go with the different girsas. Amr Papi Mishmei Derove Ad Tresi Aiche Shato. For 12 months. Okay, for 12 months, if he says, my son got married, come over to my house, so then that is not allowed. But after that, it would be okay. Okay. Okay, where are we? 1 second. Yeah, okay, great. Where am I? So I'm probably Tracy Achashatu. Meikara me'emas aser, and before the chasana. Right? So we just talked about 30 days after the chasana, a year after the chasana. Before the chasana, how long are you not allowed to go to the Oved Kochavim's house? So Rav Pape says, Rav Pape, skip the next two words. Mechira musayir be'asinte. Once they put the hops, once they put the barley into the container to make beer for the chasana, already then don't go to his house to eat. Or alternatively, they would plant barley and then in advance of the wedding, then at the chasana they would sow the sprouts and they'll be like, you guys are also going to sprout. But is it really so that after a year it is then permitted to go to his house for a Suda? Rav Yitzchak Breder of Meshasha Ikla Levei Ahu Oved Kochavim. But Rav Yitzchak Breder of Meshasha went to the house of a certain Oved Kochavim. And it was more than a year after his son's chasana. V'shamei de'oide uferish v'loyachal. And Rav Yitzchak Breder of Meshasha heard that the Oved Kochavim was giving Shevach Vayodaya to his Getchke. So Rav Yitzchak Breder of Meshasha says, all right, I'm not partaking. Yeah, but it's different when it comes to Yitzchak Breder of Meshasha because he is a very important person. And therefore, because he's an important person, even after a year, the Oved Kochavim would still be honored and he'd want to, think is getchke, but just a regular person, after 12 months, you can assume that you can go over there. So I have me to take a stop over here, even though we got a lot more to do, but I think I'm talking to go to the end of the page. Go to the end of the page. Even though this kind of starts a new sugya, I think I'm going to go to the end of the page. Okay. Meaning it starts like a new sugya that continues on to tomorrow, but anyways. V'kartosim, chulimai kartosim. What's kartosim? Amaviro, Mashmuel, Yom shetofsa by Romi Malchus. The day that the Romans took the kingship. V'tanya kartosim v'yom shetofsa by Romi Malchus. But one second, there's a brayso that talks about kartosim and also the day that the Romans became king. So it sounds like those are two separate things. Omar, Rav Yosef says, Yosef shtei tfisis tofsa Romi. Well, Rome grabbed the kingship twice. Achas b'mei Kalpatra Malchusa, once during the days of Kalpatra, the queen in Egypt. V'achas shetofsa b'mei Yevonim, as well as a second time that they chapped the kingship, and that was from the Greeks. The Chiyas of Dimi, Omar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, Tlosin v'train karve avdu remay bade yavnoi, that the Romans fought 32 battles. The Romans fought 32 battles with the Greeks. V'lo yochlu lehu, and it was a stalemate. Adeshatvinu li Yisrael ba'adayu, until the Romans joined forces with the Yidden. V'achi asnu ba'adayu, and the deal was the following. Iminon malchi minaychu iparche, if we the Romans are the kings, then you the Yidden will be the governors. Minaychu malchi minon iparche, and if you the Yidden are the kings, so then we the Romans will be the governors. V'shalchulu ramai le'avnoi, and after the team was teamed, so then the Romans, once the partnership was formed, the Romans then sent to the Greeks, Ado idno avidno bekarva, until now we were fighting, and it was a stalemate. Hashto naivid bedino, but now we're going to use our noggins. Margolis ve'evin toiva ezemein yaise bosus lechaver. When you have a pearl and you have a fancy stone, so which will be the setting for the other? Right. The setting would be less valuable than what goes in the setting. So which is the setting? So the Greeks sent Margolis levin tova. The pearl would be the setting, the base for the fine stone. Evin tova ve'inoch ezomen yaise bosus lechaver. What if it's between a precious stone and a carbuncle? Which one would be the basis? Evin tova le'inoch. The precious stone would be the basis for the carbuncle. Enoch v'sefer Torah, a carbuncle and a sefer Torah. Ezmein yaser bosus l'chaver, which is the setting. Enoch l'sefer Torah, the carbuncle would be the setting for the sefer Torah. I.e., the sefer Torah is the highest, is the most choshev. Shalchu lehu. And then the Romans sent to the Greeks, Imkain, well, if that's the case, Onun Sefer Torah Gabon, well, we have the Sefer Torah with us, Yisrael Baidon, we have the Yidden with us, Kafulu, and then the Romans suppressed the Greeks. Esrin v'shis shnin kamulu be'minusayu. And for 26 years, the Romans honored the dilio. They honored the deal, and there was power sharing and partnership between the Romans and the Yidden. Ba'ad Yisrael with the Yidden. Mikan ve'elach, however, after 26 years, ishtaibdu behu, the Romans enslaved the Yidden. Mekar ma'idarish, how come initially they, what was the drasha from the psukim that the Romans darshaned initially when they were in partnership with Vasof Ma'darshim? What was their drasha when they then enslaved the Yidden? Mekar darush, initially they darshaned nisa v'nelecha ve'elchel l'nagdecha, right? That's when Esav suggested to Yaakov that they walk to Zaman. But then the pasuk says, Yavrna Adoni Lifnei Avdoi. Jacob says to Esau, no, why don't you go ahead? And it was based on that the Romans then subjugated the Yidden. And where do we get this concept of the 26 years that the Romans honored the deal. So now here's the thing. This is like gonna really continue on to tomorrow, but I'm gonna kind of stop in the middle because it's not. I'll just remind us what this was tomorrow. It won't be like a big deal to make up. But yeah. So as where does these 26 years come from? How do we know about these 26 years that the Romans honored their agreement? The Amr of Kahana says of Kahana, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yesi got sick, they sent him, Rebbe, can you tell us, 2 or 3 shtiklach that you're from your father Rabbi Yossi? So he says to them, number 1, Me'ah v'shmeinim shana, and this is important, but we'll get back to it tomorrow. Me'ah v'shmeinim shana, kodim shenecha v'aboyis, poshto malchus harishah al Yisrael. That 180 years before the destruction of the second temple, the Romans, the evil empire, they colonized the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. So now, this is gonna, okay, let's not get into it right now, but okay, fine. Pei Shana Ad Shaloi Charv Abayis, 80 years before the second temple was destroyed, Gazu Tuma Al Eretz Amim, there was a gezerah that the lands that are not Eretz Yisrael, they have a din of Tuma, because of the Gechom there, they just bury people and them in unmarked graves, and you might be stepping over a grave. And that also glass should be Mikabel Tuma, that's a gezerah that they made. 40 years prior to the destruction of the second temple, Gosu Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin exiled themselves from the Lishkas Hagozis, and instead they went to a place called Chonus. Why did they do that? Why did they leave the Lishkas Hagozis and go to this place called Chonus? This place on Har Habayis called Chonus. That they no longer judged fines. Do you really think that it means that they no longer judged fines because they left the Lishkas Hagozis? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Shmoi. Rabbi Yehuda Amarav says that remember the following person for good reason, and his name is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, one of the Asar Ruya Malchus, who we learned about in Masechta Sanhedrin, and we're going to learn that story once again now, here on Ches Amud Beis of Masechta Avodah Zarah. She'il Malehu, that if not for him, Nishtakhu Dine Knosis Misrael, if not for Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, we would have forgotten the halachis of fines. Nishtakhu Ligarsinu, I don't really understand what this means, but what do you mean they would have been forgotten? We would learn them so that we wouldn't forget them. Okay. I don't really know what that means, but But what it means is that if not for Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, we would no longer have been able to judge Dine Knosis. What do you mean? Because the evil Roman colonial empire decreed Gezerah kol asomich yorig, anybody who does smicha. We learned about smicha in Masechta Sanhedrin, right? The being called a rebbe. Ishmi piish, back from Moshe Rabbeinu. Anybody who gives smicha will be killed. Nismach yorig, anybody who gets smicha will be killed. Ve'ir shesomchin bo techariv, in any city in which somebody is somech or musmach, so then that city will be destroyed. V'tchum shesomchin bo ye'aker, and the 2,000 amma tchum of that city will also be destroyed. Also Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So what did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? Because he wanted to give smicha to some very important rabbis, all of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, as we'll see in a second. He wanted to give them smicha. So what did he do? Halach v'yoshev ben shnei arim gedolim. So he went and he sat between two great mountains, ben shnei ayaros gedolim, between two great cities, ben beis tchum Shabbos, and between two tchum Shabbases, so that it would be not in a city, not in a tchum, etc. Ben usha l'shvarim, between usha and shvarim. V'samach sham, and there he gave smicha to Chamisha Zekanim, 5 elders, Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon, Reb Elazar ben Shmuel, Reb Avi, Mosif, Reb Nechemia, students of Reb Meir. No, the students of Reb Akiva. Reb Meir was one of the students. But when the enemies saw what was going on, Amar Loim Bonai Rotsu. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says to the Musmachim, to the great students of Rabbi Akiva, run for your lives. Amar Lo, they said to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Rebbe, v'atu mater lecha, what about you? Amar Lo, he says to them, Areni mutu lifneim, ki even she'ein lo hofrin. I am before them like a stone that cannot be turned. Amru, they said, they pierced his body with 300 spears of iron. And they made his body like a sieve. So they killed Rav Yehuda ben Bava, who's one of the Zarah. So why did we mention that story? We mentioned that story because this story happened after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. Right? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, they lived after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. And yet we're saying that because Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava gave them smicha, right? We're saying if not for him, then Dinei Knossos, right? We wouldn't be able to judge Dinei Knossos, which means that because he gave smicha to these Rabbanim, they were able to continue judging Dinei Knossos. So we see even post the Sanhedrin leaving the Lishkas HaGozos and going to the Chanus, right? Even post that move, they were still able to judge Dinei Knossos so long as they had smicha. So where am I? Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, Rav Nachman Yitzchak lo tema dinei knossos ela shelo danu dinei nefashos. No, don't say fines. Don't say dinei knossos. Rather dinei nefashos. Once the Sanhedrin left the Lishkas HaGozos and was no longer the Lishkas HaGozos, so they were no longer able to judge dinei nefashos. My time outcome came the chazut and nefishay lu rotzchin v'liachnu lemeidon. And because there were so many murderers, I guess, at that time, and they wouldn't have been able to judge them, I guess, for some reason. So Amru, they said, Mutav nigle lemakom mimakom lemakom keichid zo l'chayvu. So let us move around from one place to another so that they wouldn't be chayiv misa. Okay, I don't really get, why not just try all of them? I don't know. But that is why they left the Lishkas HaGozos. Dichsiv vasisa al pi hadavar she'yigidu l'cha min hamakom hahu lama shemakom gorim. That you do based on whatever the Sanhedrin will tell you from that place, which teaches that the Lishkas HaGozos is what matters. Meaning, right? Of course, we learned in Masechta Sanhedrin that there would be Sanhedrin Ketanas in all the communities, in lots of the communities. But those Sanhedrin, and you would judge capital cases in those Sanhedrin Ketanas. But those Sanhedrin Ketanas could only judge capital cases so long as the Sanhedrin Gadol is in the Lishkas HaGozos. But once the Sanhedrin Gadol leaves the Lishkas HaGozos, you can no longer judge Dinei Nefashos. So by the Sanhedrin Gadol leaving the Lishkas HaGozos, so then they were no longer judging Dinei Nefashos. And Chaver, we're going to hold it over here. Basically, if you remember, the question was, how do we know that for 26 years the Romans kept to their deal? We're still kind of in the middle of that, but we'll pick up from here tomorrow. Today was an interesting daf. We learned a little bit more about the Yom Tovim that we've been talking about, and we learned some interesting agaritas about Adam HaRishon, right, when he thought that because of his sin, the world is going to revert to Tohu and Vohu. And we, of course, saw the interesting story with Rav Yehuda ben Bava when he gave smicha to Rabbi Akiva's students, and we learned a little bit about the Romans and the Greeks and the Yidden, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that tomorrow. Have a good one. Peace out.